Imagine you're an emergency dispatch operator when at 22 hours and 44 minutes your phone rings. On the other end of the line, a nervous voice reports, "My 15-month-old daughter isn't breathing. She has no pulse. She's cold." What you don't know in that moment is that the person making this call is the same one who caused this tragedy just hours before. This is the story of a little girl who trusted the wrong person, and of a father who, despite losing everything, made a decision in court that divided an entire country's opinion. What he said left everyone in shock. Stay until the end to understand how a single word completely changed the course of a trial everyone expected to end differently. But before we dive into this extraordinary narrative, if you're not yet part of our community, click the subscribe button right now. Stories like this need to be told and shared so more people can recognize warning signs before it's too late. In September 2019, in North Dakota, a little girl named Mecca Marie came into the world, bringing immense joy to the Curillo family. With chubby cheeks, trusting blue eyes, and a smile that could melt any heart, she grew up surrounded by love in her Aunt Amanda's house in Moorhead, Minnesota. Amanda had assumed custody of the child when the biological parents faced difficulties that prevented them from properly caring for their daughter. For Amanda, this didn't represent a burden. Quite the opposite. She considered Mecca a daughter of the heart. In the family residence, other children were already being raised, and Mecca had cousins and a 3-year-old sister who adored the baby. The house atmosphere was filled with normalcy and affection, mornings with children's laughter during breakfast, afternoons of playing in the yard, and evenings with bedtime stories. Mecca was completely surrounded by love and protection, or at least that's what everyone believed. For more than 5 years, Brandy Adelk, a 37-year-old Fargo resident, had built a solid reputation as the Curillo family's best friend. 5 years of friendship represented a serious and significant period of coexistence. She wasn't just an acquaintance. Adelk was present at all family festivities, had witnessed the children's first steps, offered unconditional help during difficult times, and had truly become part of the family. Adelk possessed vast experience in child care and an impeccable reputation within the family circle. She knew all the little ones' habits, their favorite games, their daily routines, and even their particular quirks. Amanda regularly left her children under Brandy's care whenever she needed to be away for work or personal commitments. After all, who else would deserve such trust except someone who had demonstrated such dedication and competence during all those years? For the Curillo family, Brandy wasn't just a babysitter or occasional caregiver. She had become a substitute maternal figure, a second mother to the children. No one could have imagined that behind the warm smile with which she greeted the children for 5 years, monstrous intentions were being carefully hidden. In October 2020, Mecca had become a vibrant and joyful 15-month-old child. She could already sit confidently, babbled her first words with growing enthusiasm, and her contagious laughter managed to illuminate the entire house. At 15 months, Mecca had reached all the developmental milestones expected for her age. She was a healthy, active, and extraordinarily affectionate child who constantly distributed hugs and kisses to everyone around her. Aunt Amanda remembered with particular affection how Mecca was one of those children who approached all adults without knowing fear, without knowing that evil could exist in the world. Her unlimited trust in people deeply touched everyone who lived with her. It was during this period that Brandy approached Amanda with a proposal that sounded absolutely natural and even affectionate. Since Halloween was approaching, she suggested, "What if Mecca stays with me for a few days? I'll give her a truly special Halloween." The proposal seemed perfect. After all, who wouldn't want their child to have a memorable celebration with someone so close to the family? For Amanda, this suggestion represented nothing unusual or suspicious. Brandy had watched the children dozens of times before, and absolutely everything had always gone perfectly and without incidents. Why not allow Mecca to have fun during this special festive date with someone the family trusted absolutely? Amanda carefully prepared everything necessary for her niece's stay. Favorite toys, comfortable pajamas, extra little clothes, and everything that could guarantee the baby's well-being and comfort during the days away from home. Mecca babbled happily and gestured with animation, clearly anticipating new games, mischief, and entertainment. At 15 months old, children don't yet fully understand the concept of temporary separation. For her, this would simply be another interesting and fun adventure at dear Aunt Brandy's house. Amanda affectionately said goodbye to Mecca, kissed her rosy cheek, and entrusted her to Adelk with a peaceful heart. Neither woman suspected that October 28, 2020 would be forever recorded as the last day the child would be truly happy, safe, and protected. However, what should have been just a joyful and festive weekend quickly transformed into the beginning of an indescribable nightmare when Amanda returned to pick up her niece and encountered the first elaborate lie. Adelk convincingly claimed that a confirmed case of COVID had been detected in the apartment, and it would be absolutely necessary to keep Mecca in strict quarantine to avoid contaminating the other children at home. Don't worry at all, Amanda. I'll take care of her with all affection and attention. It's much better for her to stay here in case she's incubating the illness, so we won't risk infecting the other children at home, Adelk said with a naturalness and concern that seemed genuine. Amanda completely believed her longtime friend's detailed explanation. How could she suspect something sinister coming from someone who had cared for her children with dedication for so many years? How could she question the word of a person who had repeatedly demonstrated her reliability and love for the children? Later, during the criminal investigation, authorities would discover there was absolutely no case of the disease registered at the location. It was a carefully elaborated and planned lie to gain additional time and keep the child under her control. During the following 3 weeks, the apartment located at number 230 on 17th Street South in Fargo completely transformed into a true scenario of indescribable horror for little, defenseless Mecca. Each passing day brought new physical and psychological torments for the baby, who couldn't even understand why she was suffering so much. Adelk systematically struck the child using sharp and blunt objects, leaving the entire tiny body completely covered with bruises, scratches, and open wounds from head to toe. The little hands that previously extended, confidently seeking affectionate hugs, now moved instinctively, trying to protect themselves from new violent blows. Mecca cried desperately, screamed with all the strength her small lungs allowed, and insistently called for Aunt Amanda, but absolutely no one could hear her pleading for help and protection. Building neighbors later reported they occasionally heard a child crying loudly, but interpreted those sounds as completely normal childhood tantrums. Corrosive chemical substances were deliberately poured on the child's sensitive skin, causing painful burns that corroded the delicate skin and spread throughout the small body, including face, arms, legs, and torso. Mecca writhed in unbearable agony, but the aggressor showed no sign of compassion or repentance. The little girl was subjected to acts of intimate violence that a child of any age should never experience or even know about. A child who was still learning to walk properly became a victim of the disturbed and sick fantasies of an adult woman who should have protected her. The baby screamed in intense pain and total incomprehension about what was happening to her. In addition to all these horrors, Mecca was forced to consume alcoholic beverages that brutally burned her small and delicate throat, as well as her still-developing stomach. The alcohol caused excruciating pain, while her small body desperately tried to process and eliminate the poison being systematically poured into her organism by the aggressor. By mid-November, the child's general condition had already become absolutely critical and worrying. Her small body had essentially transformed into a continuous wound, presenting multiple bone fractures, internal bleeding, extensive burns, and incontestable evidence of systematic violence. Yet incredibly, the mistreatment didn't cease. On the contrary, it seemed to intensify. Mecca could no longer cry with the same intensity as before. She simply no longer possessed sufficient physical or emotional strength to express her pain. Only low and silent sobs, labored and difficult breathing, and the glassy look of a child who had completely lost hope that someone would come to her rescue. On November 19th, the baby was clearly dying. Adelk perfectly understood she had brought the child to a critical and potentially fatal condition, but still deliberately continued tormenting her. On that specific day, she made the decision to bathe Mecca, what would become the final torture before death. On the night of November 20th, 2020, at approximately 22 hours, Adelk put the dying child in a bathtub with water and completely abandoned her alone. For 2 entire hours, the baby was so weakened and frail she couldn't keep her head above the water level. When the aggressor finally returned to the bathroom, she found Mecca completely submerged, not breathing, and with skin taking on a characteristic bluish coloration. Only then did the aggressor realize she had effectively killed the child. In a state of total panic, she began hitting the baby's face, pinching her forcefully and trying to bring her back to consciousness through desperate methods. "Wake up! Wake up!" she screamed hysterically at the lifeless body of the child she had systematically tortured for 3 complete weeks. Mecca coughed only once. That was her last conscious sound in this world. After that, she completely lost consciousness and never came to again. Only at 22 hours and 44 minutes did Adelk finally decide to call an ambulance, but unfortunately it was already too late for any medical intervention. Mecca had been clinically dead for at least 2 complete minutes, and her small brain had suffered irreversible and permanent damage due to prolonged lack of oxygen. When emergency specialized doctors saw Mecca's body condition, they immediately understood. This wasn't a domestic accident or natural death. This had clearly been systematic and prolonged torture of a defenseless child. The baby's entire body was covered with wounds of different ages, recent wounds alongside others already in the healing process, evidencing continuous mistreatment over weeks. Amanda desperately ran to the hospital and encountered an image that would transform into her eternal nightmare for the rest of her life. She found a room completely surrounded by forensic specialists, paper bags for evidence collection, rulers for precise wound measurement, and specialized photographic equipment for complete crime documentation. When I arrived, it looked like a horror movie set, Amanda later described. At the center of all that disturbing scene was her little Mecca, connected to multiple machines that artificially maintained some sign of life in her completely mutilated and tortured body. Adelk still desperately tried to lie and deceive everyone present. "She just got sick, Amanda. She's just sick," she repeatedly insisted. But experienced doctors already perfectly knew the terrible truth. Mecca wasn't sick at all. She had been deliberately murdered in a slow, methodical, and systematic way during 3 consecutive weeks of horror. On November 24th, 2020, precisely at 8 hours and 8 minutes in the morning, the family faced and made the most terrible and painful decision of their entire lives. The artificial life support machines were disconnected according to medical guidance. Little Mecca finally found the eternal peace that had been denied to her during her last weeks of life. She was only 15 months old, having lived in this world for exactly 456 days, of which the last 23 were an indescribable hell on earth. The criminal investigation that followed the death profoundly shocked even experienced and hardened Fargo detectives who had already worked on hundreds of complex cases. The official medical examiner definitively established the cause of death as multiple injuries caused by blunt objects distributed throughout the victim's body, officially classifying the case as deliberate homicide. When investigators received the complete and detailed autopsy report, they made an absolutely unprecedented decision in their careers. The family was strongly recommended not to read that document under any circumstances. "This will change you forever as people," the responsible detective directly warned Amanda. Assistant District Attorney Ryan Yunrin, an experienced professional, who had analyzed hundreds of cases involving mistreatment against minors throughout his career, categorically refused to read the specific details in public hearing. Normally, when I mention injuries from head to toe, I'm being metaphorical. But that's definitely not the case in this situation, he declared with visible disturbance. Even Mecca's grandmother, Cindy Carrillo, recorded in writing in an official letter to the court. We were categorically told not to read the autopsy report for fear this would completely transform us as people and cause us additional irreparable trauma. On January 14, 2021, almost 2 complete months after Mecca's brutal death, Brandy Adelk was finally arrested and formally charged with qualified homicide and severe mistreatment against a minor. Bail was set at the exorbitant value of $1 million. During 2 entire months of freedom after murdering a defenseless child, while Mecca's family tried to bury the baby and find strength to continue living with that unbearable pain, the killer walked freely through Fargo's streets as if nothing had happened. In her prison cell, Adelk finally partially confessed what she had done during those weeks of horror. However, her version of events was so cynical and manipulative that experienced investigators could barely believe what they were hearing. She claimed to have left the child alone in the bathtub for 2 hours, accidentally, and that she never intended to cause any type of harm, had no intention of causing harm. Those were the words of a woman who systematically tortured a child for 3 complete weeks. Someone who poured corrosive chemical substances on a baby's body, who sexually assaulted a child, who forced a 15-month-old child to drink alcohol, claimed to have had no intention of hurting her. On September 7, 2021, exactly 1 day before the scheduled beginning of the official trial, Adelk surprisingly changed her initial declaration from innocent to guilty on both criminal charges presented against her. The maximum punishment provided by law for those specific charges was life imprisonment without any possibility of future parole. Adelk's defense attorney, Stephen Minger, desperately tried to justify and minimize his client's actions before the court. He claimed she possessed serious undiagnosed mental health problems, that she hadn't been able to adequately handle the stressful situation, and that she had committed a tragic mistake during a moment of emotional loss of control. A tragic mistake. Those were the words the attorney chose to describe 3 consecutive weeks of sadistic torture against a completely innocent child. Chemical burns spread throughout a baby's body were called a mistake. Sexual violence against a 15-month-old child was classified as a mistake. Systematic beatings to death were reduced to a simple mistake. On December 6, 2021, the official court session for sentence determination finally took place. The details presented were considered so horrible and disturbing that Cass County prosecutor Ryan Yungren categorically refused to report them aloud. In an emotional letter directed to the court and written by Mecca's grandmother Cindy, she described the immense and indescribable pain felt by the entire extended family. The words contained in that letter managed to move even the experienced prosecutor accustomed to difficult cases. Absolutely everyone present in the courtroom was visibly crying. The judge, jury members, attorneys from both sides, and journalists covering the case. Amanda read her personal victim impact statement with a broken voice. "I can't understand how someone can take the life of an innocent child and what she could have done so terrible to justify hurting her that way. I feel physical pain every time I enter through my house door because I perceive something fundamental is missing. I feel tearing pain every time I hear my children laugh because I know a special laugh is missing. Her laugh. But the most unexpected and completely surprising turn awaited everyone present when Manuel Carrillo, Mecca's biological father, stood up to make his official statement. It's important to remember he had been in prison during the entire period of his daughter's murder and couldn't even say goodbye to her before death. He was only allowed to attend the funeral for a few hours under police escort and handcuffed. This man, who had lost his only daughter in the most cruel and brutal way imaginable, stood up before the packed courtroom and pronounced words that absolutely shocked all present persons. I believe her life is still worth something and still deserves to be preserved. I completely forgive her, but I will never forget what she did to my daughter. A life sentence won't bring my little girl back to me. The courtroom remained in absolute and sepulchral silence. Even Judge Stephen Marquardt, an experienced magistrate, couldn't contain the tears that welled up in his eyes. Prosecutor Ryan Youngren later declared to the press, "In the vast majority of similar cases I've followed, victims' families categorically demand the maximum punishment provided by law. This was definitely the first case in my entire professional career where the victim's father explicitly asked for mercy for the aggressor. Taking specific consideration of the victim's father's direct and emotional request, the court decided to sentence Brandy Adelk to 30 years in prison with possibility of parole after serving 25 years of the sentence. Only 30 years in prison for slowly killing a defenseless child over 3 weeks. 30 years for hundreds of blows applied to a tiny body. 30 years for burns that completely covered a child's skin. 30 years for sexual violence against a baby who couldn't even walk properly. 30 years for forcing a 15-month-old child to consume alcohol. 30 years for transforming the last 23 days of an innocent child's life into endless agony. This means that in 2046, when Adelk turns 63 years old, she can officially request early release through parole. Mika would have been 27 at that time. She could have finished university, found a rewarding job, started her own family, and had children, but she'll never have that opportunity, while her killer will. When Adelk received the opportunity to say her final words before the official sentence, she calmly stood up and declared, "I didn't want any of this to happen. I offer sincere apologies to the family and deeply regret it. I had no intention for any of this to happen, and I'm truly sorry." Without detailed explanations, without demonstration of remorse for specific actions, without recognition of the gravity of her acts. Only a generic request for apologies for 3 weeks of sadistic torture of a child. Notably, Mecca's biological mother, Cheyenne Duchino, didn't appear in court during any phase of the process and didn't provide official statements to the press. Her complete silence throughout the entire case development remains a mystery, whether due to unbearable sadness, psychological trauma, or other personal reasons. The woman who gave life to Mecca couldn't or wouldn't fight publicly for justice. For her daughter, Amanda created a memorial page called Justice for Mecca and organized a private religious service on February 6, 2021. The family continues fighting daily against devastating psychological trauma. This haunts me every day of my life. I couldn't protect her adequately. No one ever thought she would be capable of doing something so terrible, Amanda confessed. In a later interview, the family's other children frequently ask when Mecca will wake up and grow up to play with them again. Mecca's 3-year-old sister, Octavia, constantly questions, "When Mecca gets bigger, will she wake up and play with me?" How does someone explain such a tragedy to a 3-year-old child? This story serves as a painful reminder that the most dangerous predators often hide behind masks of loving friends and attentive caregivers. For 5 complete years, Brandy Adelk built a reputation of reliability and dedication, gaining total and unrestricted access to the family's children. The father's decision to publicly forgive completely divided public opinion. Thousands of people considered his attitude an extraordinary example of Christian compassion and capacity for forgiveness, even in the face of the greatest imaginable tragedy. On the other hand, thousands of other people expressed outrage, arguing that such forgiveness sent the wrong message about the seriousness of crimes against children. Mecca's legacy lives through people who now know her story and can use that knowledge to identify similar situations and act when necessary. Each shared story represents a real opportunity to prevent future similar tragedies. If this narrative touched you in any way, leave your comments below sharing your reflections on this case. What do you think about the father's decision to show mercy? Are 30 years in prison enough for a crime of this magnitude? Subscribe to the channel to not miss other important stories about those who can no longer speak for themselves. Suggest other cases you'd like to see addressed. Each suggestion helps us give voice to those who were prematurely silenced. Always remember, knowledge is prevention, and together we can make a difference in protecting those who need it most. Mecca Marie Currido lived only 456 days, but her story will continue saving lives forever.